欢迎来到话题面对面单元。今天我们带您来到了美国首府华盛顿，专访重量级的总统顾问、哈德逊研究所的会长兼执行长 Kenneth Weinstein。或许大家对于这个名字不太熟悉，但是哈德逊研究所是美国最具有影响力的保守派的智库之一。它不只号称是共和党智库当中的精锐部队，同时也是共和党培养人才的大本营，也因此和美国政府的关系极为的密切。而且哈德逊研究所对中国大陆的立场向来非常强硬，他们所主张的中国威胁论也被视为是美国最鹰派的智库之一。美国副总统彭斯在去年10月份发表了强硬反中演说，地点就是选在这个哈德逊研究所。有人说，美中贸易大战就是哈德逊研究所一路所主导，给川普政府下了指导棋。而这次我本人独家专访到了哈德逊研究所的会长兼执行长温斯汀。温斯汀在美国的政坛号称可以直达天听，他不仅每天都和白宫通电话讨论局势，甚至是川普以及副总统彭斯最为倚重的智囊团。某种程度上，不仅代表着美国政府的立场，甚至对川普政府的政策有着极大的影响力。而在这次的专访当中，温斯汀强调，美国总统川普以及副总统彭斯，还有所有的美国人民都相当钦佩台湾民主的进步，同时也表达力挺台湾的立场。但是对于参议员 Ted Cruz 他们邀请台湾的蔡英文总统访问美国，温斯汀则认为，在战略的考量和所可能产生的效应上，美方应该要谨慎思考。不过他提出，在现阶段由美国太平洋指挥官来到台湾访问，可能会比蔡英文总统去美国访问要更加的适当。现在就带你一起来看看这整段完整的独家专访。
Let's start the interview with the so-called the trade war.
Sure.
Still going on right now. And we know that since the Trump administration took office, the trade war with China has started. And how will the U.S.-China relation develop? And how long will you perceive the confrontation will last? And what do you see the development after trade war truce that will take place in a few days in the future?
I think we're at a very different stage in the relationship with China, and that stage was marked. Let me start again. Sorry. Okay. We're at a new stage in the relationship with China. There had been a broad consensus in Washington among a significant part of the elite that by engaging China, by encouraging China to become an economic superpower, by encouraging trade with China, that China's economic development in turn would turn Chinese society more open, freer, democratic, less bellicose, and would turn China into what former United States Trade Representative Robert Zoellick spoke of, turning China into a responsible stakeholder. When the Vice President offered his major and historic address on China here at Hudson Institute on October 4th, that marked a new date in the U.S.-China relationship. The Vice President was very clear that those hopes have been dashed, and instead we're living in a period where China has not become more free, has not become more democratic, and that China and its state-owned enterprises and enterprises that are tied to its military have taken advantage of trade liberalization using a whole-of-government approach in China to meet the geo-economic goals of China, which had involved intellectual piracy, had involved technology transfers involuntarily and voluntarily, had involved cyber hacks, had involved an unlimited array of tools that stolen technologies from free societies in order to help China grow more quickly, but also to help China use these technologies for the government to strengthen its hold over the Chinese people. We've seen this in Xinjiang province, where now over 1 million Uyghurs, 10% of the Uyghur population, has been put into detention camps. We've seen it with facial recognition software that is being used throughout China, with China's development now of artificial information systems that will allow it to use its facial recognition software to follow what 1.7 billion Chinese citizens do on a daily basis in their activities. We've seen it with the development of the social credit scores in China, where people's political behavior, political views count against them when they seek jobs, when they seek loans. And so we're at a new point in the relationship where, and there's a broad consensus here in the United States. It's not just on the right, it is the right and the left. And it's, I think, the place where there's the broadest possible agreement on President Trump's policies, that we are deeply skeptical of China, deeply skeptical of the intent of Chinese industries, that American manufacturers are now less willing to manufacture in China, far less so, since Chinese practices, including the backdoor engineering of equipment to send data signals to China. And I think we'll see more information that will be declassified in the coming years about Chinese spy activities in industry. So we're at a different stage now. We do not think that Chinese corporations act like American corporations, act like Taiwanese corporations, act like Japanese corporations. And so regardless of whether there's going to be an agreement or not, I think the odds are good that there will be some kind of an interim agreement. The stage has now been set for a relationship that is much franker, it's more honest. The American public is put on warning about what Chinese behavior is about, and Europe as well is now on warning. And key to this, of course, is the Huawei, is the situation of the Huawei corporation and Huawei's use of data, telephonic data, computer data, for intelligence purposes. By law, every Chinese citizen has to provide information to the Chinese government under Xi. And Huawei, which itself has been attempted to dominate the next generation telephony, the next generation 5G systems, in order to be able to dominate the Internet of Things, in order to be able to dominate autonomous vehicles. And it is essentially a corporation that is in some sense a spy agency that is sharing information with the government and trying to gain control of the heights of technology and technological development around the world, so that all data, whether in Europe, whether in Asia, whether in North or South America, has to pass through Beijing, and Beijing can then make use of it in its artificial intelligence systems, in its spy agencies. And the American government under President Trump has stood up very forcefully against Huawei. We have gotten a significant number of European countries now to not accept Huawei 5G systems. Almost every country in Europe, with the exception of Italy, Greece, Hungary right now, possibly Portugal, have decided they're not going with Huawei anymore. And this is despite the fact that Huawei is heavily subsidized by the government, and so its costs are much less than other systems. And so we're now at a point where the relations between our two countries are changed forever. This doesn't mean that we're going to war. Mm-hmm. It doesn't mean that commerce will continue, but the kind of commerce we have, where we have allowed the Chinese, we and some of our allies have allowed the Chinese unfettered access to certain segments of the economy, those days are over. It's a much more realistic assessment of what China is up to, and over the long term, we will be stronger as allies, and China will be weakened by lack of access to all sorts of technologies that it otherwise might have had.
So in your view, you do think that the Americans do have the upper hand right now in the trade war?
The Chinese have had a long strategy that was outlined by my colleague Michael Pillsbury in his book, The 100-Year Marathon, which talks about China's secret strategy for global leadership. This is a book that was very widely read here in Washington, particularly at the White House and by key officials in the Trump administration. And the Chinese had this long-term strategy. Many of our leaders were naive as to what China was up to, but we are now at a point where our leaders are well aware of what China is up to, and we have begun to react and take serious measures. But this is a long struggle. It's a struggle for free societies to stand up for privacy rights, for intellectual property, for cybersecurity. It's a long struggle. The Trump administration has offered a very important corrective, but we're a long way off from being able to declare victory of any kind.
Mm-hmm. You just mentioned the last October 4th, the speech gave by Vice President Michael Pence. The speech was given right here at Hudson Institute, and where he expressed his support for Taiwan, and China did respond strongly. And on January 2nd, the Chinese leader, President Xi Jinping, he also issued a statement emphasizing that one country, two systems, and not giving up on using forces against Taiwan. And how do you list? Because so many people might consider President Xi's statement is a counter statement to Vice President Michael Pence. What's your view?
The Vice President and the Trump administration admire, as do the Vice President, the Trump administration, and the overwhelming majority of Americans admire the democratic people of Taiwan, admire the progress of democracy in Taiwan, admire a vibrant civil society, a vibrant culture, and what a free society has to offer. Mm-hmm. And the Trump administration, more than any U.S. administration since the passage of the Taiwan Relations Act, has very clearly articulated this affection, this respect for Taiwan, for its people, for its leaders as well, though less openly. Certainly, in the eyes of the Chinese, this shifted the goalposts with regard to China in their minds. But it certainly did not shift the goalposts with regard to Taiwan in our minds. And President Xi can threaten the people of Taiwan, can threaten the government of Taiwan, but the democratic people of Taiwan will stand up for freedom, for liberty, and there is now a much stronger understanding in Taiwan as to what the Chinese challenge is to Taiwan, the nature of the threat, after President Xi's open remarks, but also after not so subtle actions taken by the Chinese over the past few years. And so as for cooperation with the United States, it's very important. It needs to be deepened. Mm-hmm. The Taiwanese need to feel secure. They need to know that their American friends stand with them at this time, as we've stood with them historically since the birth of the Republic of China.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So you mentioned that the U.S.-Taiwan relations, the most important foundation is the Taiwan Relation Act, which has been implemented 40 years. And do you think that the TRA can still meet the current demands after 4 decades? Because now some U.S. politicians, they encourage more arms sales to Taiwan, as well as develop closer ties with Taiwan, including the passage of the Taiwan Travel Act. What do you make of this?
I think the Taiwan Travel Act is a terrific piece of legislation. I think we should have more high-level officials from Taiwan visiting the United States. They should be welcomed here. Taiwan is a free society, a vibrant democracy, an important nation for the security of Asia as part of the first island chain. And so the question to me about the Taiwan Relations Act is there are some very wonderful things about the Taiwan Relations Act. I think the way that the act has at times been interpreted needs to be re-examined. That it has worked for the past 40 years. It has kept the peace. It has allowed Taiwan to blossom. But I think we need to be more willing to sell arms to Taiwan. We need to, and then not just F-16s, we need also to think through aiding Taiwan's defense industry as it develops its own indigenous submarines, as it develops its own indigenous unmanned vehicles, whether they be unmanned aerial vehicles or unmanned underwater vehicles. We need to figure out ways to cooperate with Taiwan as it develops these indigenous systems to strengthen Taiwan's national security. And we need to do so in a way that better takes advantage of what the Taiwan Relations Act should allow.
But any increased arms sale or any friendly gesture to Taiwan will irritate China. You can imagine that, because recently the group of U.S. Senate, they called on Speaker of the House Nancy Pelosi to invite our Taiwanese President Tsai Ing-wen maybe to give a speech at our Congress. Do you think it's possible for a Taiwanese president to give a speech here in Washington, D.C., especially at Capitol Hill?
Look, in the best of all possible worlds, that would be a wonderful thing. That is not going to happen in the next few years, I don't believe. I think that there is a sensitivity here in Washington, even among Taiwan's best friends, that one should not take action that would unnecessarily create deeper tension between China and Taiwan. And it's one thing to have a visit by officials. It's another thing, and we should have, for example, the Indo-Pacific commander should be allowed to go to Taiwan. That's important. Taiwan is an important part of Asian security. But he needs to go, and it would be good to have President Tsai come to the United States, but I think that such a high-level public visibility event could be challenging, I think, as much as it would be welcomed, and it would be a beautiful sight, and it would be an incredible tribute to Taiwanese democracy. But I think we also need to think strategically as to what the costs and benefits would be and what problems would ensue. That's not to say that we should allow China to define the relationship between Taiwan and the United States, but we just need to be prudential in thinking through what we should be doing.
Yeah, that's a very good point. And this year marks the anniversary for Taiwan Relations Act. But in the meantime, this year also marks the 40th anniversary for the former Chinese leader Deng Xiaoping's reform and opening up policy. What is the impact of this policy on China, and how has this policy affected Asia-Pacific region's development? Because not with this policy, China wouldn't have come to emerge into a strong power as it is now in this region.
Look, the openness that Deng Xiaoping promoted 40 years ago was a world historical event. It created a middle class in China that through foreign investment, through technological development, through turning China eventually into a manufacturing hub, took hundreds and millions of people out of poverty and gave them the opportunity to gain skills, to have meaningful employment, to have access to modern technology. People went from homes, and when I talk to Chinese friends who are my age, they grew up in homes without heating in the wintertime. They grew up obviously without air conditioning. They grew up without modern transportation systems, and we all think back to those early days when the late President George H.W. Bush became the U.S. envoy to Beijing in the 1970s, and the mid-1970s, and we think back to the President and Barbara Bush bicycling around Tiananmen Square. There were very few cars in China in those days, and now China has become this modern, bustling economy. The architecture in the major cities is incredible. The movement, obviously, of rural people to the cities, and the change in Chinese society, where high technology is now omnipresent in China. It's changed China internally, but there are challenges with that change now, with the use of these same technologies to oppress its citizens, to follow their behavior, to record their actions whenever possible. We've seen a China that has proclaimed an openness to the world that it doesn't really have. And this openness has allowed state-owned industries, intelligence agencies to gain access to all sorts of information, both about Chinese citizens and about overseas individuals and corporations, violating freedom of almost every conceivable kind of freedom. So we're at a moment in the relationship where the hopes of a liberalized China have not been met. The dreams of a liberalized China have not been met, and instead we're at a period where China is using this prowess that it has developed because of Deng Xiaoping's policies to take advantage of its own citizens and of those it does business with. And so it's a very challenging moment, but I think we have never been more clear-eyed about what this moment means, both for us and for the people of China.
Yeah, back to the current situation of the U.S. and China relations, there is a term called Thucydides' trap, which was brought up to world's attention by my professor at Harvard University, Professor Graham Allison. Thucydides' trap means that when one rising power means China challenges the existing superpower, then war is almost always inevitable. So do you think the Thucydides' trap will eventually happen?
I don't think so, actually. I think that when it's happened in the past, it's because countries that challenged the dominant power had less interaction with the dominant powers than we do today. China and the West were so intertwined at so many levels, whether it's education, whether it's trade, whether it's culturally. There are so many ties, and moreover, the ability of our defense, of our armies to take action against each other is so immense and could be so destructive. Whether it's from nuclear to conventional, from airstrikes to ground battles, I think that the level of deterrence is far higher than it's ever been. And China, moreover, I think doesn't seek to have an outright war with us, but it wants to gain the benefits of war without having to fight war. Mm-hmm. And so that means, as it has through Belt and Road, to build up key strategic access points, key strategic choke points, whether in Djibouti, whether in Hambantota in Sri Lanka, or elsewhere in Central Asia, in South Asia, and Southeast Asia, in an attempt to control these choke points so that simply by threatening action, it can get others to back off. But I think thanks to President Trump's leadership, thanks to other leaders like President Tsai, that the world is on warning about Chinese intent. And the fact that people publicly know what China is about and could do means that we are far less likely to wake up one day, turn on the television or radio and hear about some massive Chinese attack somewhere. The stakes are very high. We saw this last summer in Doklan, where India and China faced the possibility once again of a war, just as they had this disastrous war in the 1970s. And this time around, however, the difference is that the Indians held firm. And America and its allies are starting to hold firm on China. We are no longer accepting Chinese claims as given, and we're running important freedom of navigation exercises in the South China Sea to show the Chinese that that they can just dominate with impunity. So I don't think the Thucydides trap is inevitable, and I don't think it really applies all that perfectly to the situation with China. But it will take leadership. It will take leadership on both sides, on the American side and on the Chinese side, to make sure that a war never occurs, and also that China doesn't gain the benefits that it would get from war without having to fight a war, which is almost as important in the Chinese mind.
Yes, correct. You just mentioned the leadership on both sides. Taiwan's presidential election will take place next year in 2020. Now the possible candidates from the ruling party DPP and the KMT has gradually surfaced, and the DPP's candidate will be the incumbent president, Taiwanese President Tsai Ing-wen. And how do you see President Tsai's performance over the past 3 years? And in last November, Taiwanese local election, DPP was defeated. Will it pose a challenge to President Tsai's re-election in 2020?
Look, first let me say I think that the Taiwanese domestic affairs are the business of the people of Taiwan. As an outside observer who's met with President Tsai, I have been impressed with her. I've been impressed with her determination. I've been impressed with her strategic judgment. I've been impressed with her commitment to defending the people of Taiwan, to understanding what it takes to defend the people of Taiwan, and also her commitment to try to keep an open channel to the mainland, which has been challenging. And I think that she will go down in history, obviously, as the first female leader of Taiwan, but she'll also go down as a leader who stood firm on occasion, and more broadly. So let me repeat that. She will go down in history not simply because she's Taiwan's first female president, but she'll also go down in history as a leader who stood firm against China and against the Chinese threat, while maintaining an open channel to China. Who the next president of Taiwan is going to be, that is up to the people of Taiwan. That is not up to. I don't have a vote in it, but I think it will be as all elections in Taiwan are. It will be a bruising and long campaign, and there'll be many debates and many opportunities for the Taiwanese to assess the President Tsai and assess her opponent. But I will say this: I think the people of Taiwan are now on warning about the potential for Chinese interference in the elections, and what needs to be done to expose that long before the election, so that there is no question of the legitimacy of the 2020 election.
Yeah, but there's some speculation that the U.S. might be favor President Tsai to be re-elected because President Tsai's party is disliked by the Chinese side. Do you agree with this kind of speculation?
I have not heard that from. I think there's great. There's great affection for President Tsai here in Washington. That's clear. But I have not heard anybody. I have not heard anybody talk about any favorite candidate in this election. It's not the business of the United States to pick and choose electoral victors in these elections, as long as they are between candidates who stand for freedom, for open societies.
Yeah, but now that there are every Taiwanese presidential possible candidates, no matter which party they belong to, they all want to come to the United States, especially Washington D.C. for a visit. What do you see about this?
I think it would be wonderful. I think it's important. that we have the opportunity to interact with Taiwan's leaders, not just in Taipei, but here in Washington, and that it would be good if more Taiwanese officials came to the United States and if more American officials would go to Taiwan.
Okay, so now this talking about the ongoing the event that will be presented to in everybody's eyes in very near future. President Trump, he just announced in his State of the Union address that there is going to be a Trump-Kim summit, the second Trump-Kim summit in Vietnam, in end of February. And what, in your opinion, since the first summit, have both sides fulfilled their commitment? And in the second meeting, what do you think they would like to achieve?
President Trump has taken an unconventional approach to dealing with North Korea. His view is that you had to think much more broadly than past presidents did about facing the challenge. And he thought you had to run a gamut of policy options from A to Z, from threatening fire and fury, threatening an attack on Pyongyang, and obliteration of the regime, to offering incentives such as the possibility of a bright economic future for the people of North Korea and the North Korean leadership, most notably through the kind of real estate development the president has talked about for Pyongyang and for neighboring areas. That being said, we're now at a stage of the discussions between the United States and North Korea where we are seeking to judge just how serious North Koreans are about denuclearizing. The president is clear that he has rejected the policies of both President Bush and President Obama in very separate cases, but President Bush's policy with regard to Saddam Hussein and President Obama's policy with regard to the Iran deal, that we are not going to seek regime change in order to end North Korea's nuclear program, which was part of the intent for the Iraq war because we feared these weapons of mass destruction that we believe Saddam Hussein had. But we're not going to overthrow the North Korean regime, but we're also not going to offer the North Koreans incentives before they agree to get rid of their nuclear program, which is what President Obama did, where we took some sanctions off of Iran and we gave them access to billions of dollars in exchange for the hope that we could open Iran to the world in the hopes that Iran would somehow internally change and not seek a nuclear weapon in the future. So Trump's vision is very simple. Let's let the North Koreans know what we will give them. Let's tell them what we want, and we're going to test them. And I think Secretary of State Pompeo has done this, and Special Envoy for North Korea Steve Biegun has done this already. They've been very frank with their North Korean counterparts, talking about concrete steps the North Koreans will have to take to meet demands we have, so that we can move to the next stage of negotiations. Either the North Koreans are doing this or they're not. It's very simple. But in the meantime, we are standing firm against North Korea. We are an important part of our missile defense review, which the Pentagon just published, focuses on the North Korea challenge. We are putting in place not just Aegis Ashore, THAAD missile defense systems. We're moving towards space-based systems, but we're also putting in place boost phase missile systems that would be placed off of aircraft, some even in the Sea of Japan, that could be based off of either F-35s or off of UAVs, unmanned vehicles, that would target a North Korean missile in the first 200 seconds of launch to take it out. So the idea would be that we would have a multi-layer missile defense system in place. So whatever North Korea wants to do, it could not launch against Japan, it could not launch against the United States, even if the negotiations fail, that this would not be, that their missiles would never have the intended impact. That being said, there still is the danger, if the North Koreans continue their nuclear program, of a dirty bomb, of selling nuclear material to some rogue nation. And so it's important that the nuclear talks proceed, and that the North Koreans agree to start making the kinds of concessions that the administration is going to start outlining to them.
Yeah, how do you feel about that? It seems that Chairman Kim Jong-un has always have to discuss with Chinese leader Xi Jinping before the summit. Do you agree that China is doing something behind the scene?
Look, the relations between Xi and Kim Jong-un are complicated. There was a point where there was very little communication between the Chinese and the North Koreans when the Chinese were working most closely with us on sanctions at the UN. However, since then, the relationship has become much stronger, and they are clearly consulting, they're clearly working together, that even if we want to keep sanctions in place, that the Chinese and also the Russians, to a lesser degree, will do what they can to prevent further impositions of sanctions if the talks go in a totally different direction. And they want to deepen economic ties to North Korea as well. But so do the South Koreans, who've talked about a rail line and increasing investments and exchanges with North Korea. And within that context, it makes it a lot harder for the U.S. to achieve with allies what the president had achieved early on with Kim Jong-un, which was to keep him isolated, to have a tough sanctions policy that really was hitting the North Korean leadership and its people. But today, as Kim Jong-un coordinates much more carefully with Xi Jinping, and as he coordinates also to a lesser degree with the Russians, it is much more complicated for us to isolate the North Koreans to achieve the kind of diplomatic outcome that we would like.
Yeah. So the second Trump-Kim summit is about to take place in a few days. Under such circumstances, what do you think? Do you foresee any meeting between President Trump and Chinese leader Xi Jinping in very near future?
The president clearly wants such a meeting. He's talked about it openly. Timing-wise, it can't be done before the reimposition of the next level of tariffs with the Chinese, which would be scheduled for March 1st. It could be that the president agrees to a short-term deadline extending the current tariffs before new ones kick in, and that before they kick in, a meeting takes place. I think that's probably something the president would want to do, but it's unclear right now as the state of the negotiations whether that can happen or not. I think the president very much wants to get an agreement with China, but he does not want to have an agreement with China that is going to allow China to continue to take advantage of intellectual property theft, of backdoor engineering of equipment. I think the requirements are going to be very clear as to what we need from the Chinese, and the question is whether the Chinese accept them, and even if they accept them, what does that actually mean? But all that being said, the president has already made huge progress on the agricultural portfolio. It's clear, but also because of the impact of the vice president's October 4th speech, people are now well aware of this Chinese geostrategy, which is an immense challenge to us and to our allies.
Yeah, great. Thank you, Dr. Weinstein, for your precious time giving us such a valuable interview. Thank you so much.
Thank you. My pleasure.
Good. Thank you.
好的，今天的慧眼看天下，我们带您前进白宫专访重量级的意见领袖。未来还有更多的国际消息，也请您持续的锁定慧眼看天下。我是黄宝慧，我们下周同一时间再会了。